Morning, everyone. This story I've been following since it broke. I did a big New Year's Eve. That's what I did New Year's Eve. It was a big Mark Norman. What? It was a two-parter. I think it was like a 2 30-minute episodes. Anyway, regardless, I've been following this story since not it broke because I think it was happening kind of before I was really focusing on federal politics. But as soon as it came into the limelight, I've been looking at it. And so I'm a little bit disappointed that all of it isn't going to come to light. It was supposed to be a trial. It was supposed to be, a damaging trial in the August of an election year is not a great look for Trudeau. And that's what I was predicting. And it looked like that was going to be the case until everything fell apart and Trudeau had to drop it. And then basically say, yeah, you're a free man, you're innocent, you're totally innocent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they were claiming that Mark Norman had leaked information from a meeting he wasn't even in attendance at least 50 other people had the same information. And he was the only one charged for months and months and months. So what's happened to Mr. Norman, or Vice Admiral Norman, is terrible. And so Mackenzie Gray's tweeting, quote, "Breaking, Vice Admiral Mark Norman is retiring from the military after reaching a confidential settlement with the government." Here's a statement from the government and Norman. And I think this is probably good legal advice, but I am sad that we will never know the full story, because it seemed like there was a lot to be told. So here's the joint statement by the Government of Canada and Vice Admiral Mark Norman. June 26, 2019, Toronto, Ontario. With the assistance of the Honourable Warren Winkler, former Chief Justice of the Ontario Court of Appeal, counsel for both the Government of Canada and for Vice Admiral Mark Norman, have concluded discussions held in good faith, which have resulted in a mutually acceptable agreement, the details of which will remain confidential. Vice Admiral Norman remains committed to the Navy, the Canadian Armed Forces, and their mission. However, after consulting with his family, his chain of command, and his counsel, Vice Admiral Norman has decided to retire from the Canadian Armed Forces. Both parties believe that this resolution will return focus to the critical work of the Canadian Forces, which is the protection of all Canadians. The Government of Canada thanks Vice Admiral Norman for his 38 years of dedicated service and wishes him well in all of his future endeavors. Ooh, that last paragraph's a little cold, eh? 38 years, and without Mr. Vice Admiral Norman, the Davies supply ship doesn't get built, it doesn't get done. Right? So a fine how do you do, a fine thank you. I hope the parachute is very golden. I hope that he got the rest of the years that he was owed, plus time that he was on trial, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mark Norman had a GoFundMe because the government refused to pay his legal bills because they said, no, he's a leaker. He shouldn't have his legal bills paid for by the government because it's not going to happen, until they couldn't deny it anymore. Until they realized they had overstepped and what they had done was, he was doing his job. What they had done is accused an innocent man, really. And that was borne out in the fact that they threw the trial out. So it's a sad state of affairs when this is happening in Canada. It's a sad state of affairs when a 38-year veteran, somebody who has risen to the ranks of the Navy as Mark Norman did, and did the things that he did. He made sure that ship got built. Without that ship, the Canadian Navy was a Coast Guard. Right? If you can't get resupplied at sea, you're a Coast Guard. You're not a Navy. You can't stay in operation, right? If you're out at sea and you can't get resupplied, if you have to come back to docks, nope, not a Navy. So what Mr. Norman did was do his job. And what the Trudeau government tried to do is bury him. Very concerning. And now we're not going to hear. But man, that last paragraph, we wish you well in all of your future endeavors. Here is some interesting news from the Liberals. Miss McKenna kind of tries to make points, but then falters off and goes off in a different direction. So the first point she makes is we know that in putting a price on pollution, she says, taxing carbon is the most efficient way to cut emissions, but that's not true. BC has increased their emissions. Anyway, I'm going to stop this periodically to look at some things. Here's Miss McKenna.
It's unfortunate that we're in this situation with another conservative premier politician who doesn't seem to understand that pricing pollution has proven that provinces that have had a price on the pollution have been the fastest growing in the country, and the pricing pollution is the...
What? Okay. Provinces that have a price on pollution have been the fastest growing in the country. Oh, okay. What does that mean? What does that mean?
Most efficient way to reduce emissions and tackle climate change. We need to move.
They're growing in the most efficient way to reduce emission and tackle climate change. Okay, growing in what way? If adding humans adds emissions, and it does. In what way is increasing population working towards our goal? In what way is importing people en masse helping Canada with our goal of reaching the CO2 emissions? What does that mean?
Forward to tackle climate change. We see the impacts of climate change through extreme weather, including in Alberta, where there are forest fires that are burning earlier than ever before, that are burning stronger, and that's having serious impacts on the lives of Albertans as well as on their economy. We need to.
So I just had a quick look. I've done lots of videos on fires recently. Here's one from June 7th, which is 20 days ago, and it says several evacuation alerts lifted as cooler weather helps crews battle wildfires in Alberta. Okay, here's Tony Heller, and he says coolest, wettest, fewest fires on record. That's interesting. Here's the whole video, and we're not going to watch it right now, but the link is in the description. You should watch it. And here's Ross McKittrick, and it's interesting to note, and Miss McKenna doesn't talk specifically about flooding, but flooding has been cited by her on other occasions as an obvious sign of global warming or climate change or whatever you want to call it. And here's from the IPCC's own report, and link is in the description, and it says assessment report for the one that I'm quoting here, and the second one is linked right in the line there. 2012 report. Okay, so there's two different reports. This one's the more up-to-date report. This is the 2012 report, right? But from the first one, flooding, in summary, there continues to be a lack of evidence and thus low confidence regarding the sign of trend in the magnitude and or frequency of floods on a global scale. That's page 214 of this report. And to which they added in their 2012 report on the subject, in the United States and Canada during the 20th century and the early 21st century, there is no compelling evidence for climate-driven changes in the magnitude or frequency of floods, page 176. And so, like I said, you can access that there. And here's another one about droughts. In summary, the current assessment concludes that there is not enough evidence at present to suggest more than low confidence in a global scale observed trend in droughts or dryness, lack of rainfall, since the middle of the 20th century, owing to a lack of direct observations, geographical inconsistencies in the trends, and dependencies of inferred trends on the index choice. And that's the IPCC. And again, the links are all right here and in the description if you want to look at them for yourself. That bottom quote is from the top link here, okay? And we're going to listen to Ms. McKenna again for a brief second and then look at another one of Mr. McKittrick's articles, because at the end of this, she tries to say, yeah, and those things that people are trying to say are not true either. Kind of funny. Here we go.
To take action on climate change, it would be much better for all Canadians if we were all able to do it together. The price will not go up. The plan is a price, till 2022. That is what was negotiated with provinces and territories. The plan is not to increase the price post 2022. We are doing exactly what we said we do, what we negotiated with provinces and territories in 2016. 2016, we spent a whole year negotiating with provinces and territories, including a price on pollution, but also a whole range of other measures. But let's be clear, we're committed to meeting our target. I think the biggest question is what we're going to see from the Conservative politicians, because we know that they deny the science behind climate change, including the link, very clear link between extreme weather and climate change.
Okay. Extreme weather and climate change. This is in reference to the tweet that Miss Lisa Raitt tweeted out and then deleted, and I've reported on as well. This is Ross McKittrick. This scientist proved climate change isn't causing extreme weather, so politicians attacked. And I'm just going to give you the summary here. And I've actually sat down with Mr. McKittrick, and I'm going to... Sorry if I've got your last name wrong, sir. I probably do. But I'm hoping to get him on the show, and we're going to talk about this stuff because it's interesting, because he's an economist. He's a PhD level economist, and he's putting stuff out in the Financial Post that is directly talking about the science of this. Okay, so here it is. Quote, "The bottom line is there is no solid connection between climate change and many major indicators of extreme weather that politicians keep talking about, such as hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, rainfall, floods. despite Trudeau's claims to the contrary. The continual claim of such links is misinformation employed for political and rhetorical purposes. Powerful people get away with it because so few people know what the numbers show. Many scientists who know better remain silent, and the few who push back against the propaganda, such as Roger Pilke Jr., find themselves on the receiving end of abuse and career-threatening attacks, even though they have all the science in their corner. Something has gotten scary and extreme, but it is not the weather. And if you haven't read Mr. Pilke Jr.'s whole thing, it's quite worth the thread. Like it's got graphs and it's very easy to read. The link is in the description. I recommend reading it. I mean, it's very, very interesting that the government is trying hard to push this stuff without a shred of science. And in fact, they cite things that are the IPCC themselves say are not likely to be changing very much, not a high confidence level that that's actually happening, according to the IPCC themselves. And here's the last piece I'll leave you with on this climate change thing, or on the carbon tax issue, because this is really a carbon tax issue, because she's saying that this works. And we're saying that it's not working, right? This is not a good way to reduce emissions. Oh, and I was going to show you BC as well. Hold on. So my point is twofold. One, BC's emissions are increasing. I'm going to show you that in just a minute. And two, the Liberals know that if they want to actually reduce emissions, the carbon tax has to be a lot higher. So saying that they're not going to increase it up to 2022, it's going to remain at $20 or whatever it is admitting that they're not going to actually meet their Paris Agreement goals or whatever. And we know that. Nobody is going to meet the Paris Agreement goals, period. It's not going to happen. Because, as I've said, not going to happen with the current trajectory of levels of population, because population is really what drives increases in carbon, in CO2. Okay, Financial Post is reporting this, quote, "Why the Liberals might scrap their carbon tax." No, really. Yeah. Now, when future historians retrace the rise and fall of carbon taxes in Canada, they may well conclude that last week was the point at which the policy decline became irreversible. That's because it was the week when the Trudeau Liberals gave up insisting that a carbon tax is the best way to fight climate change. And there's really no other way to interpret Environment Minister Catherine McKenna's pledge not to raise carbon taxes beyond 2022. That pledge came in response to a Parliamentary Budget Office report that concluded that the federal carbon tax would have to rise from the planned $50 per ton in 2022 to $102 per ton by 2030 for Canada to meet its Paris Agreement emissions commitments. The PBO's analysis simply cannot have been a surprise to the Liberals, least of all to McKenna, whose own department had warned her back in 2015 that carbon taxes would have to be much higher to work. So she knew this. And she also mentioned that BC's emissions, or provinces that have carbon taxes, have reduced emissions, and that is simply not true. Here's January 1st, or January 7th, 2019, and from energeticcity.ca, everything Fort St. John's, and they're saying CO2 emissions continue to rise in BC despite provincial carbon tax. CO2 emissions in BC continue to increase even with the province's carbon tax. Provincial data shows CO2 emissions went up from 61.3 million tons in 2015 to 62.3 in 2016, the most recent data available. CO2 levels have increased in 5 of the last 6 years. That data is available, right? And they've had it since 2008. So that's in line with what I was saying. Now, I apologize. This was a very quick Google just because I wanted to get this in there. But if you want to do your own research, please do. I'm interested in this. The mechanism doesn't work, and it provably doesn't work. So it's really interesting that the Liberals are doubling down on this. Really interesting. Okay, this is the last... this is the second last story, but it's an important one. It's an opinion piece, and this is a companion piece to Jordan Peterson's one that he wrote the other week. And if you haven't seen that, well, you should read it. It's very interesting. I'll see if I can get the link and put it in the description. National Post is reporting, quote, "When gender identity education and theory goes wrong." In his recent commentary, links right there. In these pages on the risks associated with teaching of gender theories to elementary school children, Jordan Peterson referenced a column I wrote in another publication. The column concerned a human rights complaint filed by Pamela and Jason Buffone on behalf of their daughter, N, against the Ottawa Carleton District School Board for discrimination on the basis of gender and gender identity and contravention of the Human Rights Code. I scroll down I'll read it. Peterson faithfully summarized the story that led to the complaint, but readers may be interested in a few points about the complaint and the responses from the school board's lawyer that Peterson omitted as not directly salient to the thrust of his thesis. To recap briefly, the Buffone's daughter, N, 6 years old, and by their account, a happy girl, comfortable in her skin, adored school, was abruptly plunged into considerable distress when informed by her teacher, a young teacher, 3 years experience, during a session on gender identity, that gender is fluid and untethered to biology, and that, quote, girls are not real and boys are not real. The lessons continued, and so did N's distress, to the point of asking to see a doctor about her fears. The Buffoons said in their claim that, quote, they were concerned about the impact on N's view of herself as a girl prior to the teacher's discussion with the grade 1 class, and had consistently identified as a girl and had not previously expressed uncertainty or discontent with her gender identity and biological sex. The Buffoons had asked the teacher to affirm N's identity as a girl, that is, reassure her that her identity as female was real in order to relieve her anxiety. Nothing that the Buffoons asserted was denied by the school or its officials, but their request was rebuffed out of hand, first by the teacher, who said that her lessons reflected, quote, a change within society, then by the principal, and all the way up the ladder to the superintendent of the school board and the curriculum superintendent. They removed N to another school where these gender theories are not taught, and where her mother told me that she had recovered her wanted buoyancy. In their human rights trial of Ontario claim, the Buffoons requested as a remedy that the tribunal order the school board to ensure that classroom instruction does not devalue, deny, or undermine in any way the female gender identity, and that parents be informed when lessons on gender identity will take place, including the teaching objectives and the materials that will be or have been used for such lessons. The response of the school board's lawyers, who asked for dismissal of the complaint, said the claim has no reasonable basis for success. The lawyers note that the teacher's right to teach gender identity is endorsed by the Ministry of Education. The Minister of Education, and that the age appropriateness of a classroom discussion does not engage in a code-protected prohibited ground. That is to say that even if N was adversely affected by the teacher's lessons, and they do not deny that this is the case, she has no grounds for redress according to the Human Rights Code. If the school board is successful in its bid for dismissal, it means that the words gender identity and gender expression do not apply to everyone. They apply only to those whose gender identity does not synchronize with their biology. The protection of a biologically female child to identify as a girl would not be protected. Feelings of distress among the very small percentage of children whose gender identity differs from their biological sex must be alleviated at all costs. If that cost involves distress or confusion in the vast majority of other children, like N, that is not discrimination. The Buffoons are not buying this, while acknowledging that the Human Rights Tribunal may well do so. The Ontario Human Rights Code takes a fairly broad view of discrimination. It states, for example, that a poisoned environment is a form of discrimination. The Buffoons are going to provide evidence that the manner in which the teacher was teaching the concept of gender identity resulted in a poisoned environment. I wish the Buffoons well, and so do many other people. On social media, many people applauded the Buffoons' courage in going public on behalf of other people with similar stories who haven't the confidence to take such a definitive step. One respondent who wishes anonymity told me her son's story, which bore similarities to N's, in that the child has never shown the slightest sign of gender confusion before lessons on gender theory began in school, with children being encouraged to identify along a spectrum rather than asserting they were either girl or boy. Out of the blue, I wish I had $1 for every time I'd heard the phrase used in this connection. He came home one day and announced that he was pansexual and a demi-girl. The parents took their son to see a psychologist. When she was told the name of the school and the teacher, the therapist exclaimed, "You're the 7th set of parents from that class who have come to me with this problem." It is clear that something is going terribly wrong with regard to gender teaching in Ontario classrooms. Ontario must step up an investigative task force composed of disinterested educators, disinterested gender researchers, and parents to objectively evaluate the teaching of gender identity in public schools. I absolutely 100% agree. This is damaging to people, and it was classified in many mental health textbooks, identified as a mental health disorder. Gender dysphoria, etc., is not something to be pushed on kids. Really, it's not. It's damaging. Last story for this morning, and I know I'm going long. I know. It's fun, isn't it? Toronto Sun is reporting City Committee asked to approve $108 million in hotel contracts for refugees. This is short, though, okay? Short. A city committee will be asked Wednesday to approve 6 contracts valued at $108 million to house refugee claimants for the next year. Those contracts on the agenda for the Economic and Community Development Committee will provide 800 hotel rooms in Toronto, Brampton, Newmarket, and Pickering from July 1st, if needed, according to the shelter, supported and housing spokesman Greg Serganian. Sorry if I've got that wrong. That doesn't include the $24 million already spent to house and feed those in Radisson, Toronto, of $13 million, the Toronto Plaza Hotel, $9 million, and the Comfort Inn Airport Hotel, $2 million over the past 6 months. Okay, I'll do those two. Serginian said this year's budget for hotel motel accommodation is $46.4 million, and the feds provided the city with $45 million in May to help offset the cost. He did not say what happens if they go over budget. He said there were just over 2,600 refugees in the motel program as of Tuesday. In the past 18 months, more than 8,100 refugee and asylum claimants have been assisted with finding permanent housing. So it's interesting. This is a very, very expensive gambit. Lots of money spent. And here's Guelph. Here's Guelph, my hometown. Feds announced $1.48 million to address homeless in Guelph. Oh, well, that's kind of close to all that money, right? 13 million, 19 million, right? 24 million, 9 million, 2 million. We get 1.48 million, right? In 1 year to help our homeless. I guess it's not in 1 year. No, here's the article. New federal funding promised to the County of Wellington, not just Guelph, everybody. County of Wellington is expected to enhance and expand local programs focused on keeping vulnerable people housed. On Friday morning, Guelph MP Lloyd Longfield announced the county is to receive $1,485,909 spread out over 5 years to enhance and expand programs that help people find housing and remain housed. One of these things is not like the other. Why are we spending so much money on non-citizens? Why are we putting them up in hotels? Why is this okay with everybody in this context? It's not okay with me. This failed government needs to go. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out thepeoplespartyofcanada.ca and have a wonderful, wonderful day.